Welcome back to another episode of me reading the book that I wrote. Just the audio version, or if you're watching, obviously the YouTube version. Realistically, there's not any difference from the YouTube and the audio version. You can just see all of the weird mannerisms that my face makes, and the fact that I cannot sit still if I know somebody's like looking at me, whether it be through the camera or in person. So, that being said, this is the second to last episode because we're almost finished with the book. So those of you who have been here the entire time, much appreciated. You're the real MVP. Let's get into it so we're not here until 10 p.m. Because I still have to, still got to work out. Don't take it personally is the chapter title for this one. We can just get right into it. So this is probably one of those lessons that I learned unintentionally, or at least without a lot of extrinsic effort on my part. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly where I learned it, but the easiest thing I can think of is how my mom and dad raised me as I got more comfortable in my own skin and began to really choose things I liked and disliked. Whether it was the clothes I chose to wear, the TV shows I liked, or the sports teams I followed. Everyone always has their own reasons, and anytime someone did it differently, they always had an answer along the lines of, because I want to, or I liked it and that's all that mattered to me. No matter if I thought their music or their outfit was cool, that statement right there was enough for me to at least respect it. Usually, it was an NBA player wearing some obnoxious outfit or a diehard Oklahoma State football fan in a more personal example. I'm pretty basic with my overall attire. Some may even call it boring, so that's never fascinated me past the look. And as I've mentioned before, and will probably mention again, God's ways are always perfect. So me, being adopted into and raised in a house of Oklahoma Sooner fans, was the only way to go. Focusing on the sports team example for a second, I used to be the worst kind of Sooner fan. You couldn't tell me a single negative thing about the Oklahoma Sooner football team when I was in elementary or junior high school. No matter how factual your argument may have been, in my eyes, you were either with us or against us. There was no way to be in any sort of the middle. I was such a homer, as my Uncle Lee called it, who is also an avid Sooner fan. I was a ride-or-die fan for my team, I'll be honest. These days, I would still say I am, but I'm more willing to admit the fact that we have yet to fully live up to our preseason expectations. The chase for 8 continues. And then at the time of this video coming out, we are currently on a 3-game losing streak, which has never happened in my literal existence and almost before that. So we'll see what happens against Kansas of all things, of all teams. But growing up, the small but big thing that my parents did was encourage us to stand our ground on our opinions on things we liked and disliked. It made us who we are, and they didn't want us at all to be the same as everyone else. That's just plain boring. To go with the unending encouragement, my parents also loved to roast us about it as well. Example A, my mother's favorite thing to give me a hard time about is my love for my Sooners. She hates football. Couldn't care less about it. But the fact that I love it so much, and one team in particular, gives her the opportunity and motivation to check box scores and look at highlights like any superfan would, just so she knows what to bring up and which players played terribly. I hated every moment of it. But I can't help but laugh because that is proof that she cares enough to do her homework. Important lesson inside of a lesson. If you want to make jokes and or talk trash, do your homework on the subject first. That way it hits home and you also avoid running into the risk of looking like a complete fool when someone comes back at you. My mom was good at it on the regular, so I always knew how to be a good sport about it. I always looked at this as my parents' way of building thick skin on us kids. Overly sensitive kids grow into overly sensitive adults, and nobody wants to be friends with those kids or those adults. Take a quick inventory of your life and make sure you're not one of them before I continue. One day, at work, this area of my upbringing was truly put to the test. At this point in time, I was working at the local YMCA, running front desk operations and watching over the fitness floor at this point in time. I was working the fitness floor with a coworker who I won't name. This coworker of mine was quite a bit older than I was at the time. He was grown and married with 2 kids. His absolute favorite thing to do was brag about himself and his kids. Bragging on your kids I can understand because all parents do that. The self-bragging was a little excessive, but we had all learned to maneuver through it in conversations with him. The day had been oddly slow for people coming into the gym, so we got into a lengthy conversation amidst cleaning the weight room and re-racking scattered weights. At the time, it wasn't anything unusual to me, but he started bringing up one of his multiple accomplishments and then asking me how I stacked up next to it. I told him I really couldn't because there was a pretty notable size, strength, and age gap between us. He laughed and tried to say I was just coming up with excuses so it didn't seem that bad. Without getting much of a whisper out, he just kept going. For some reason, he began pointing out aspects of my physical stature that were completely unrelated to what we had been talking about. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm certainly not the tallest guy in the room, nor am I the strongest. No excuses, just facts. I didn't have any issues with those things because 1, I knew that I couldn't do anything about my height. 2, when I wasn't on shift, I was either in the weight room working out or I was at home eating and sleeping. I was doing what I could to change the latter example. With each jab in my direction, I just kept laughing. For the most part, he wasn't pointing anything out that was news to me. The biggest thing I knew not to do was to try and argue or jab right back at him. I had plenty of material to use against him simply because he was working right across from me at the same place. We were on the same employment level, but my situation was a kid in college. He was not. My parents always taught me to be the bigger person, even if the other person was in a position to, quote-unquote, deserve it. The Bible, but technically Jesus himself, teaches us to turn the other cheek. So I just let him continue. None of it actually fazed me, so it wasn't really an issue. The conversation went on for about 20 to 30 minutes before he ended up needing to use the restroom or something. I don't completely remember at this point. All I remember is that after he left the area, my manager at the time finally spoke up. He had been in the background watching the whole thing go down. He asked what I had done to have my coworker just go in on me like that without an apology or a just kidding afterwards. I told him I actually hadn't done or said anything, that it was completely unprovoked, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He asked me why I hadn't retaliated in any way or tried to get him to shut up, and I just shrugged it off. I told him that if he needs to let his frustrations about his own life out on some kid he barely knew instead of actually doing something about it, cool. It didn't bother me in the slightest, and some of it was actually kind of funny. Again, my manager gave me a look of utter disbelief. If it made him feel better about himself, then it's all good. I will certainly live to see another day. He asked why I didn't even try to bring up some of the obvious facts that all of us on staff were aware of, at least to get him to chill out a bit or slow down. I told him because that wouldn't be the right thing to do. If I start doing it back, I'm just as bad as he is, and I honestly didn't care enough. None of us would be seeing him after we finished up our college classes anyways, so it would literally be a waste of time. My manager nodded, agreeing that I'd made a solid point. As my coworker was making his way back over where my manager and I were, my manager quickly finished off our conversation with, "I don't know how you just sat and took all that while just laughing along with him, but I have a great amount of respect for you. Seriously, it shows a lot. Something I'm not near as good at, accepting compliments appropriately." I sort of laughed, and I tried to shrug it off, but as you can clearly tell, it stayed from me for the rest of my life. It wasn't that big of a deal, but obviously I brought it up in this scenario anyways. Reading back over this, my response to my manager sounds kind of cheesy, but that's just the truth. It only sounds cheesy because nowadays, most people don't do the right thing, and they don't tell the truth. Neither of them is popular, and neither gets views or likes on social media, or at least not near as much as the opposite does. Growing up, it was mainly just my parents instilling an idea of standing your ground, even if you're made fun of keeping a thick skin. Looking more into it now, I realize that a lot of people express their own insecurities by pointing them out in other people. They avoid dealing with and coming to terms with their own issues by making other people's issues seem worse and more obvious. It's odd, especially coming from adults, but you have to realize it stems from an unhealed wound of their past. Something that they went through, got made fun of for, or couldn't change about themselves. It has absolutely nothing to do with you, and you have to make sure you do your best to not take it personally. No matter how you respond, it's not going to make that big of a difference. As long as you don't stoop down to that individual's level, you'll be fine. The moment you retaliate is the exact moment you become just as big of a fool as they are. It's not your responsibility, nor is it worth your time to fix their issues. Now, I will say, there's a fine line between just letting it happen because it's not worth your time and getting walked all over. I'm not much of a fist fighter, but I know the level of common sense it takes to remove myself from the situation. Again, it's not your responsibility to fix or deal with anyone else's problems or insecurities. I can guess with the utmost amount of certainty that you have plenty of problems and insecurities of your own to deal with without adding on someone else's to your plate. Don't do that to yourself. It'll only make you both worse. It's even more uncommon than it was when I went through this experience, but do your best to just let things roll off your shoulders. Don't give people who have no business being in your head rent-free space. Forgive that individual, no strings attached, and move on with your life. That's the same as if someone gave you a burning hot piece of coal and you expected them to get burned. You're the only one holding the hot coal. You literally have so much time in the day, like only so much time in the day, and wasting your time taking things personally or trying to like fix someone or waiting for an apology or something like that, or someone to feel remorseful. It's just not going to happen. 9 times out of 10, that person does not care. And I would say out of those 9 times, probably 6 or 7 of those times, they don't even know that they did anything wrong. It's very important that you don't take anything personally just because you only have so much energy in the day and you only have so much time in the day. Don't waste it on someone else who doesn't deserve it, your time and your energy. Yeah, just don't take it personally. It's really not that serious. Just laugh. Like, It's not that bad. And who cares? If someone's making fun of you, make fun of them back. It's not that hard. Let's move on to the next one. This next one is going to be interesting. The hardest thing I've ever done. Some of you may have heard of the program I'm about to discuss, and some of you may not have. By now, thousands of people from all walks of life in every corner of the world have completed it. I'd be willing to bet somewhere in the millions more have attempted it. Before I get into it, I think I'll just go into a detail about someone who has an incredible impact on my life as a whole, and someone who changed the entire trajectory of it. I'll try my best not to get too fanboyish about it, but we'll see what happens. Someone I've mentioned a time or two throughout this book so far is Andy Persella. This man is a complete stranger to me while simultaneously being like a big brother to me. Big and scary, full of tattoos, yells a lot, cusses a lot, has more expensive cars than I do pair of shoes. CEO of multiple million-dollar companies, big brother. I found out about Andy from my guy Alfonso. Like I mentioned earlier with all of our crazy conversations in the YMCA towel room, Alfonso showed me Andy's podcast. At the time, this particular podcast was called the MFCEO Project, which has since been renamed and reformatted into Real AF with Andy Persella. For the duration of Andy's original podcast format, he goes through and lays out all of his plans, ideas, way of life lessons he has learned growing up, business, and how to do things right and wrong, amongst a million other things. In the chapter where I discussed college, I said I only have about 2 years' worth of college education completed, and it took me 3 years to do it. Without even sitting down to calculate how many hours and how many minutes of podcasts Andy has released, I know, for a fact, I've learned more from him in a week's worth of episodes than I ever did in college. My biggest pet peeve about college, aside from the tuition and book fees being a total sham, was the validity of the information. Having a professor teach a business class or taking a course on entrepreneurship taught by someone who did exactly what everyone else did never sat right with me. Andy has taught me things I didn't know I needed until long after. I look back and realize I only knew what to do because I listened to Andy's podcast. He has real-life experience, real-life failures, and real-life lessons to teach. He started out as a broke but hopeful kid who wanted to make something of himself. He's heard all the same stuff I've heard after dropping out of college about getting a real job, and he's all too familiar with the jokes thrown at him. The biggest thing I admire about Andy is that he doesn't care what anyone thinks. He's well aware of what it takes to become someone everyone else can only dream of being next to, and he knows what the actual work looks like. Andy is not perfect, and he never claims to be. But what Andy is 100% himself. I've always admired this about him, and I've done my best to take those lessons he's taught me and not only utilize them in my own life, but teach them to everyone else I know too. Whether I speak the exact words I've heard Andy say or simply emulate the lessons, I do my best to grow and be better daily. Aside from the podcast, Andy is the co-owner of First Form International. First Form is a widely known supplement company based in Missouri. They're one of the most widely known companies throughout the supplement industry, and that's because they stand out and above the rest. Due to Andy's upbringing along with his brother Sal, First Form is adamant about doing things better than anyone else and trying anything and everything to go above and beyond. To nerd out for a second here, First Form is the first company to go through the careful and detailed process of figuring out cold processing their protein. This particular method is so important just because, like any other food, whey protein can be burnt and denatured if it is manufactured at too high of a temperature. Think of it from the perspective of grilling a chicken breast out in your backyard for dinner. If you leave the chicken unattended on the grill for too long, what happens? That's right, it gets burnt to a crisp. No matter how much barbecue or Chick-fil-A sauce you try to drown that chicken breast in, you're still going to taste that burnt flavor. Gross. If you're some sort of weirdo who manages to power through the taste for some reason to try and finish that chicken, you've unfortunately only wasted your time and space in your stomach. When protein is burnt, it is denatured and almost impossible for our bodies to break down and use. When protein is being heated up past its burning point, the individual strands of amino acids stretch apart and come back together to form one giant clump once it's cooled down. Think back to when your headphones still had wires attached to them. Remember when you neatly wrapped them up and proceed to stick them in your pocket. And once you went to retrieve them later, they were somehow in a completely jumbled up and tangled mess. It's exactly how burnt protein cools back down and forms into clumps. These clumps form what's called covalent bonds, and our stomach acids cannot break down or process any of these. So thinking back to our own protein powder, when's the last time you remember drinking your traditional protein shake with just water and actually enjoying it? None of that chalky aftertaste or questioning if the flavor was really chocolate lava cake or if it was just chocolate water with a hint of chalk. Exactly. So that being said, if your protein discloses somewhere on the tub, whether it has been cold temperature processed or low temperature processed, it's the same thing, just slightly different wording. And you can be confident of two things. One, you're not wasting your time and money drinking something that your body can't even process in the first place. And two, it tastes exactly like you would expect it to. No two vanillas are the same in real life, so vanilla cupcake protein powder and vanilla ice cream protein powder don't taste the same. How's that for a double college dropout who just works at supplement retail store? It's so cheesy, bro. I don't understand why I put that in the book, but I can't at the same time. So moving forward. Anyways, like I said, First Form was the first supplement company to go through the scientific laboratory hassle to figure all of that out. And if I'm not mistaken, it was actually done at the University of Oklahoma. Andy's a Longhorn fan, but I'm sure he appreciates my Sooners doing the legwork. I'll ask him about it when I meet him in person for sure. The First Form team blows everyone else out of the water with their quality supplements, hardworking culture, and focus on family. I often tell people who are hesitant about changing their supplements that other brands will take what First Form does and either slightly modify it or blatantly copy it. This isn't just me advertising for them. It's just facts if you actually know what you're doing. Funny story about the combination of the three things I just went over. Alfonso, Andy, and First Form all come together in one way or the other in the job I currently hold. Alfonso started working at Triad, fitness, supplements, and nutrition before I had even really heard of it outside of him mentioning it to me. After a bit, I had made my way over to the store a few times to see Alfonso and check the place out. At that point in my life, I was working at a warehouse and hated every moment of it. I had recently been dumped and was working on finding a second job to increase my overall income, but also to occupy my time so I was too busy to think about the last year of my life. After seeing my new boss, Kevin, post about how they were growing quickly and he had just about worked himself into the ground that week, I thought about reaching out to him personally to ask for a job. I vividly remember sitting in the gym parking lot, scrolling past it on Instagram after my workout and thought of how I could best make myself seem worth hiring. Or I thought about mentioning that I knew Alfonso, but almost immediately told myself no. First of all, I wasn't raised like that. I'm not supposed to be throwing people's names around without even asking, let alone expecting all that to be all that I need. Not to mention, I had absolutely no experience or knowledge of supplements or retail. I looked up to the sky and told God, I can't do that to Alfonso or myself. It'll be pretty cool, but I'm not doing anything about it myself. So this one, I'm placing solely into your hands, Lord. If it's meant to be, then I'll wait. And I put my car in drive and picked up some Panda Express on the way home. I honestly don't remember thinking anything further about the job, Kevin's post, or even pre-workout for that matter, for the next few days. That was a Saturday afternoon when I saw that post and prayed that prayer. The following Tuesday evening, Alfonso texted me out of the blue and just asked me how I was doing. I told him I was fine. And I was like, just working out, reading the books, that kind of thing. Without even acknowledging my response, Alfonso proceeded to ask me if I wanted the job, an opportunity to work at Triad. Not a guaranteed big money paycheck by any means, but a chance. An opportunity to be someone high up in the company when they got big. I almost dropped my phone completely after I read that. I couldn't seem to respond yes fast enough. I don't recall ever being so excited and so nervous at the same time. Fast forward past all of my hours of training, 7-hour mandatory written test all over the individual ingredients and products in the store, and 2 NASM certifications later, I was working the warehouse and Triad at the same time. I didn't think I could hate that warehouse job any more than I already did, but for the first time in my life, I truly enjoyed going to work. Working at Triad, that is. The warehouse was my main source of income for the time being and nothing more. I quit that place as soon as I could. I was quiet and nervous with every customer I took in the beginning, but with Alfonso helping me every step of the way, I grew much more comfortable taking customers and just making friends with each of them first. As I got to know my new coworkers a little better, I finally got to hear the backstory of Triad, its beginning, and where Kevin actually is from. Kevin is from the St. Louis area, which is where a few of the supplement superstores are. Oddly enough, guess who owns those stores along with the other 30 locations they have throughout all of Missouri? Yep, Andy Persella. Kevin used to work for the same guy I consider to be all the college education I've ever needed and more. Andy personally shook Kevin's hand as he attended his last monthly company meeting before leaving for Oklahoma and opening up the first Triad location. Since then, Kevin has opened up a second location of his own and has been invited to First Form's massive and newly built HQ. He got to hang out with all the cool people I see on Instagram and even got to talk with Andy himself and catch up for a bit. As I mentioned before, Andy's biggest flaw is that he's a Texas Longhorn fan, so he's wearing a burnt orange shirt in Kevin's picture that he posted with him. Now, back to the rest of the important stuff, specifically the program that Andy created. This program is called the Live Hard program and consists of 4 parts, all of which have to be completed in sequential order with absolutely no compromise or deviation. To appropriately finish the program in its entirety, it will take 1 calendar year. The first and most well-known portion is called 75 Hard. Then Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. The only portion of the program I personally completed is 75 Hard. It's that way for most people I know, but I've attempted Phase 1 on more than one occasion. I've also failed on more than one occasion. But that's not what we're talking about here, so let's just focus on the first portion. 75 Hard consists of a series of tasks that are to be completed daily with no excuses, deviations, or interruptions. For 75 days in a row, If you fail to complete any of these tasks, even if you completed all the others to complete perfection, you're required to start over on day 1. Sounds crazy, right? Of course it does, but that's the point. These daily tasks are by no means complicated either. You must drink 1 gallon of water every single day. A gallon of water is equivalent to 128 ounces of water. You must also work out twice a day for 45 minutes minimum at a time. One of them must be outside where you are vulnerable to the elements, whether snow, ice, rain, wind, etc. You must also read a minimum of 10 pages a day of some sort of self-development book. No Harry Potter, no Hunger Games series allowed, because they do not count as self-development. Next, you must follow some sort of strict diet. Absolutely no cheat meals and zero alcohol is allowed. Lastly, you must take a progress picture every single day. You guys still following along with me? How does all that sound so far? Honestly, it's not very hard to do most of that stuff. I already work out nearly every day for about an hour. I already read for at least 10 to 20 pages a day. And I don't necessarily have the cleanest diet, but I could be certainly doing much worse. Every time I attempt to complete the program, the hardest part for me is the gallon of water. I can't tell you a good reason for why, other than the fact that I just hate drinking water. There's no taste to it, no carbonation, no caffeine, nothing. Not to mention, I don't ever remember to drink water in the first place, let alone 128 ounces of it. I've attempted 75 hard a total of 5 times since the first time I ever truly tried to do it. And I've only completed it twice. My first attempt was when I forgot to read my 10 pages for the day. I fell asleep at the end of the day. Attempt number 1 failed. On my second attempt, I was about 1/3 of the way through, and then I woke up on day 31 and remembered I had forgotten to take my progress picture for day 30. I had somehow dragged myself through the 2 workouts, a full day of clean eating and a gallon of water, snuck my 10 pages in while working my 10-hour shift at work, and finally made it home to eat my last meal of the day and shower before bed, and still managed to forget the easiest task on the entire list. Simply standing in front of a mirror and taking a picture of myself with my shirt off. Takes literally 3 seconds and could have been accomplished either right before or right after my shower. Nope. Attempt number 2 failed. After giving myself a few days to let my body recover physically and let my mind reset after being incredibly frustrated with myself for messing up again, I planned my third and final attempt. If I somehow managed to fail for a third time, I told myself I was going to completely stop trying for a bit. After mentioning that to Alfonso, he looked at me dead in the face and told me that I had better not even think about failing this time. No excuses allowed. Do or die time. After planning out my daily schedule with much more intent than the last 2 times and keeping all side jobs to a minimum, I went for it. I began attempt number 3 right as the coronavirus hysteria was beginning to make its way through the United States. I knew immediately, even before it happened, what came next. All of the gyms in Oklahoma were forced to close their doors to any public access. I repeatedly told myself no excuses and began thinking of other ways I could manage getting my workouts in. Being outside was never an issue. It's not like they were going to close down outside. At the time, that seemed completely unreasonable, but looking back at it all, they did actually try to enforce something close to that, but we survived. I knew friends who had solid garage gym setups and people who could lend me bands and other equipment like weight vests so I could still complete my daily tasks. I reached out to them as soon as possible. With all the gyms closing down, it really made me focus on when I would be working out and where. If I was planning on going to a friend's house to work out, I had no way of rearranging the time frame, so it was either get all the other stuff done early or else. Shout out to everyone who helped me out, like Matt for graciously lending me his garage gym even when he wasn't home, and my guy Trace for letting me steal the weighted vest for a couple of weeks. The next issue I faced while attempting to complete 75 hard this time was a food shortage, actually. All these people who were overreacting and buying up all the chicken and non-perishable foods were starting to get on my nerves. You could easily tell who was buying in bulk because they were freaking out and who was buying certain foods because they actually ate that stuff on a regular basis, like myself. I had to utilize Kevin and his wife Alyssa, living on the other side of town, to deal with that problem. I would bring them toilet paper from my side of town, and they would bring chicken and rice for myself to eat. Adaptability is one of the biggest lessons 75 Hard teaches you. Control what you can control, and then think quickly on how to get around problems that pop up periodically. Anyone can complete their daily tasks when the conditions are perfect. How about when they're the exact opposite of perfect? Andy has a book that goes along with 75 Hard, but it and also the app weren't released until my second completion of 75 Hard almost an entire year later. In the book, Andy talks about the stages of 75 Hard and has a name for each one. Essentially, he gives each group of days, weeks a name to describe how you'll be feeling mentally and physically. Towards the end of my third attempt, my usually calm and patient temperament was being tested on a daily basis, it seemed. I don't often allow frustration to come out, nor does it ever get all that high in the first place, because I'm pretty chill the majority of the time. Going back to the previous chapter, don't take it personally, just let it roll off your shoulders. In the book, Andy describes his feeling as a direct correlation to how well you follow the program or not. If done with the correct intent and faithfulness for the last 55 to 60 days, you've not given into a single self-made excuse or desire or cheated in any area of your life. You have absolutely no tolerance for your own nonsense, so your level of patience for other people's mediocrity and stupidity is at an all-time low. That could not have been more accurate. Even the smallest things I normally wouldn't even bat an eye at would put me on edge. People not picking up their trash, complaining on social media, pee droplets on the toilet seat, skipping a workout because they earned it. All of it made me sick to my stomach, and at one point I had to mindfully monitor my own screen time so I wouldn't blow up on someone for no reason. The last week of attempt number 3 was when the gym started opening back up, and I could not have been more excited. I was growing weary of all the banded workouts, the low weight, high rep routine, and basically just making new things up as I went along for my outside workouts. By the time my local 24-hour gym finally opened back up, I was in what Andy called in the book God mode. What that means is that you're dialed in to everything that you have to get done with laser precision. No one can stop you or even get in your way. If they even try, you'll run them right over without so much as a look back to see if they're all right. Once finally completed, I strolled into work on the morning of day 76, having already eaten 3 donuts for breakfast, and I was halfway through a package of Pop-Tarts I had so dearly missed while going through the program. I happened to be working with Alfonso that day, and he couldn't stop laughing at me because he knew it was about to get real bad real quick. I had pizza for lunch that day and Chick-fil-A for dinner shortly after we closed up shop. I slept like an absolute baby and didn't work out for the following 3 days. I had to give the blisters on my feet a chance to finally heal up after being miserable to deal with for the last week and a half. I cleaned my diet back up quickly because after not having that kind of food for so long, it actually messed with my stomach and started affecting my workouts. The first thing I for sure stopped doing was drinking all that dang water. Like I told you before, I hated that part the most. Again, I definitely noticed the difference in a matter of days, but aside from the next time I completed 75 hard, I never drank that much water again. Also, working out in the rain while you were soaking wet is the worst, so I definitely stopped doing outside too. I kept my walking routine as a bit of a warm-up for my training after that, but I avoided outdoors when I could. What is the point of having air conditioning if you don't use it, right? About a month or so after completing 75 hard, I felt like my normal self again. I was able to only work out once or even take a day off completely without feeling guilty, and my patience level was back to where it was before I started. The long-term effects of the program I wouldn't be aware of until much later. The biggest takeaway from 75 hard is the mindset change. If you ask Andy about this transformation challenge, he'll more than likely roll his eyes at you. It's a mental toughness challenge, not a transformation challenge. I hadn't fully understood what he meant by that until I began noticing how I approached even the simplest of tasks in my daily life. I would run through a mental grocery list of sorts, containing all the tasks I needed to do for that day, and I would find myself actively looking for a hard way. Even if it was a straight shot to the grocery store after the gym, I found myself asking what else I could get done for the day. What else could be done by me that couldn't possibly be done by anyone else any better? It was odd at first, but the more I noticed it, the more I relished in it. I had some people try to talk me out of some plans just because, why don't you just do it the easy way? And then it would be my turn to give them weird looks. Anytime anyone asks me about 75 hard and what it was like, the first thing I tell them is that it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life, and to this day still is. The next thing I would tell them, it is by far the best thing I've ever done. The next question is usually my favorite out of any of them. Would you ever do it again? Without a moment of hesitation, I tell them I absolutely would, and I already plan on it. At least once a year for the rest of my life until I die. People always look at me like I'm the craziest person on the planet after that. Those of you who have done it, you get it. For those of you who have not done it yet, I suggest you get to it. It'll change your life for the better forever. I'll put my entire life savings on that, and Andy would too if you ask him. It's a no-brainer. This is the chapter where, if you're watching on YouTube, you can tell which shirt I'm wearing and for what reason. It's a collab shirt between my job Triad and First Form, which is super neat because like they're a big like $1 billion company, and we got to like partner with them, and we're just like some like 2.5 store. I say 2.5 because our third store is almost open. 2.5 store business where we're just trying to make it and make a difference. So that's cool. Aside from me dropping out of college, me doing 75 hard and loving it is by far the most like trash talk I've ever gotten about any sort of life decision that I've ever done in my entire life. It doesn't matter if it's like friends, family, coworkers, especially. But I hear the most trash talk about this program to me, and like, you know, I've already done it. Why are you doing it again? What's the point? It's not sustainable. And then big one is like, most people compare it to like a bodybuilding competition, which is certainly not the same thing. And I consider bodybuilding competition way harder for sure. I'm not not naive. People will always be like, oh, when are you going to compete? I'm like, absolutely not. I respect the sport of bodybuilding too much to put myself through that because I don't personally think I would have the same, desire or like mental fortuity to put myself through that and actually like make it on stage and not be an embarrassment to myself, whoever I choose to coach me through it, as well as everyone else involved. I just feel like I wouldn't be able to do it. Maybe that's something I need to work on, but personally, I don't know. I have no desire to do so. If it was like, I need you to do this and then, some big portion of your life will open up. If I got confirmation of that, obviously I could put myself through it. It's not that hard mentally. Everything else from there, like the fact that, I eat quote unquote cheat meals, barely track my food, like cardio is almost non-existent. All the stuff that's currently required, they are not daily habits. It would be interesting for sure. So obviously bodybuilding is way harder than 75 hard, but 75 hard I do enjoy. I do argue for it, but it's hard. It's easy, but it's hard. Like, dude, reading books, drinking water, exercising, taking a picture, it's not that hard. Literally like super easy task. The hardest part about it is this consistency and like continuity of it. Because there are some days where you're like, dude, I feel fine. It's not like me trying to be like, a baby or a weenie, like, oh, I don't want to work out today. It's literally like, bro, I have blisters all over my feet. All of my joints hurt. Everything hurts. And I just need one day to like sleep an extra 8 hours or something. That is usually where the like actual hard part comes in. But usually when, you're frustrated that you don't want to do it or you're busy and you don't have time and it would really make your life easier to do something besides complete your checklist, that is usually where the growth happens. Because like I mentioned in my book, if you can complete those tasks on your day off from work, like today, I literally could have done all of it in like 3 hours and been fine. But it's my like one day off of the week. Obviously, super easy if I have no obligations other than stuff I want to do. And the weather's nice outside. There's a caveat to it. I do prepare myself in the beginning for it. I don't just jump right into it. So especially with like the size of your stomach, being able to eat that much food, drink that much water, I do have to prepare myself. And also, jumping off of the Chick-fil-A and Brahms train, cold turkey does not work for me. I do gradually, like over like a month span, work on my water, increasing my water intake, so I'm prepared for it. And I also work on not like going from like 1,600 calories of complete nonsense to 3,000 calories of only good food, like good for you food. So there's that. And there's also, in bodybuilding, they call it a reverse diet. So you're super strict, super low calorie in like peak week of a bodybuilding competition. Your body can really like respond rather terribly if you don't reverse out of that strictness the right way. So it's the same thing with 75 hard. If you go from like 3,000 calories of like perfect food, perfect amount of water, exercising every day, all of that, and then you go to, 2,000 calories of like Chick-fil-A, Brahms, Pop-Tarts, donuts, don't work out, no water, your body is going to explode in terms of like digestive issues. You're going to get bloated. Like there's so many things you have to be mindful of. So that was the first time around. That is where most people, including myself, will not do that appropriately because they're just super excited to, have a cheat meal again, or for some people it's drink alcohol. I don't drink, but usually that is like most people are like, oh, bro, I can't wait to just go grab a beer and a burger with the boys kind of thing. If you don't reverse out appropriately, it's going to be a bad time. Mentally, physically, emotionally, it's just going to be a bad time. Second time around, I was more mindful of that. And this one was almost even more difficult, but it was one of those like no excuses things because I did it with Preston, who's the manager at Norman, and then Kaylin, who's she works at the Quail store with me, and she's like my like right hand girl, not right hand man, but we did it together, so it was like a non-negotiable. But that was the first thing I told them was like, hey, have your cheat meal, have your day, whatever. Afterwards, you got to get back on it because like it's gonna be a horrible time for you for the next like 2 weeks trying to adjust back to just feeling normal again. So, just for anyone who's thinking about doing it, make sure you prepare beforehand and prepare also after by getting less strict by the week. With that being said, that will be kind of the end of this little section of it, and then we have one more chapter before this episode is over. This one is called The Tip of the Spear is the Bloodiest. So, something that I have only just started to realize is how many people look up to me as a leader. I'm not, quote unquote, tooting my own horn by any means, but the way I was raised and how I carry myself naturally attracts people. That in itself is really cool to think about, but the more I dwell on it in detail, a lot of what comes to mind is the amounting pressure that comes with it. With all those eyes upon you, any slip up or moment not in line with your previous character display is under immediate and extreme scrutiny. That being said, I would much rather have it that way instead of living a life not worthy of being looked at as an example to be emulated. That would mean I'm living a less than life, a life of mediocrity, which is one of my biggest fears. I'm not naive enough to think I am always doing everything the right way the first time, with no mistakes in between. I have more to learn, room to grow, and plenty of improvements to make in each facet of being a leader. The only thing I truly try to focus on is doing the next right thing. There are moments as a leader when you need to think 4, 5, or even 10 steps ahead of everyone, but the first step for any situation is narrowing in on what that right next step is. Taking multiple right steps moving forward is how you get yourself and your team where you need to go. It's how you build momentum and build trust, especially if you're a newly appointed leader or someone who has aspirations to be one in the future. Thinking back to each job I've had working in my career, I've eventually worked myself up into some sort of leadership position. At Chick-fil-A, I wouldn't necessarily become a manager until much later on down the road while being in my second stint at the restaurant. Before leaving the first time, I had gradually worked myself into what would now be called a team leader, I believe. There are multiple tiers you can maneuver through, but I never bothered to pay attention to what those were. Initially, I was not there to be anyone's boss, nor did I see myself as any sort of leader. I did what I was supposed to do. I always got to work early, because like one of the few college professors I actually learned something from said, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, don't bother showing up to my class. Once I was at work, I usually had 10 to 15 minutes to mentally and physically prepare for my shift. I could just chill in the break room on my phone, chat with coworkers who would be coming on at the same time as me, fill my quote-unquote employees-only cup, or just stand there and wait for the clock to hit that time. Getting to work early is something that my parents taught me from the start of my employment years. It's important for 2 reasons. One, just in case there is an unexpected traffic because of a wreck or something, you'll still have ample time to deal with the situation without any repercussions from my job. Second, arriving on time or completely late shows a lack of respect for the job itself, as well as a lack of responsibility on your part. Although you choose to spend your personal time at work, you are directly compensated for said time as long as you hold up your part of the arrangement. Once clocked in, I was simply there to do my job to the best of my ability. I was not there to outwork anyone, be better than anyone, nor was I mindfully trying to set any sort of example. I was just doing me, trying to get my next paycheck. Both of my parents are some of the hardest working people I know, and although it's not necessarily quote-unquote in my blood, they might as well have brainwashed the same mindset into me. Doing the bare minimum only begets bare minimum return, so why even consider that? That option never even crossed my mind simply because I didn't want to only ever have the bare minimum. My parents viewing that kind of work ethic as unacceptable probably helped a little too. I guess what I can take a little bit of credit for is the ability to learn quickly, use common sense, and the ability to adapt on the fly when necessary. I think other than just me showing up and doing my job, those things quickly set me apart from others. Oddly enough, common sense is not so common anymore. So in my first couple years at Chick-fil-A before taking a brief hiatus, I was looked at as a leader without knowing it just because of all those small things. My management at the time would always use me to train new hires, teach me new changes first so I could teach everyone else, and then basically trusted me to do what needed to be done. Training always involved a lot of talking on my end, a lot of patience while the newbie learned, and an openness to grow myself. Not everyone learns the same way, so I had the opportunity to learn much of the basics forward, backward, and sometimes even sideways. Fast forward about 2 years or so, and I'll walk you through my first realization of what it takes to be a good leader. Anyone can be a leader, but only the good ones make a lasting difference. With my return to Chick-fil-A, there were mostly new faces and only a few old ones, so I chose to just go back on how I started initially. Instead of the obnoxiously loud, always laughing Anthony, who could sometimes get himself into trouble because of the amount of goofing off with friends he'd do, I said as little as possible. I showed up to work early, went to whatever part of the restaurant I was responsible for that day, and just did my job to the best of my ability. In the kitchen area especially, I got a few side eyes and some second looks just because, as the new guy, I already knew what I was doing. Not that I was a superstar right off the bat, but not much had really changed, so I just had to get back into the rhythm and knock some rust off. A few high school kids in the back noticed just because I didn't say much, and I didn't have to ask for help. I think they may have taken it as an arrogance initially, but like I said, I wasn't there to make a bunch of friends. I just wanted to do my job, get my paycheck, and go home. At the same time, I had made my return. The big brother figure I mentioned earlier I had as his manager was, unbeknownst to me, getting ready to make a spectacular exit. Before all that went down, he was pretty much the only person that could vouch for me. Not necessarily because we had a close relationship outside of work, but simply because he was one of the few people still working there when I had returned. Throughout the week of his exit, I tried to hit the gym with him, hang out with him, etc., and he would always tell me he was busy. I kept digging to try and see if he was just ducking me or if he was really that busy, but couldn't find much out. I learned a lot from him, but holding my cards close to my chest was one of the biggest lessons. He's the best at it. As I'm sure most of you know, Chick-fil-A is closed on Sunday, so our work week ends every Saturday. Having planned way ahead of time, he made sure to leave everything the company had given him in the safe locked up and disappeared. I wouldn't hear from him for about a year after that. With his sudden departure, a newly vacant managerial position was obviously open that needed to be filled immediately. Due to my cumulative experience at the restaurant and previous leadership experience at the job I had left to come back, I was offered the position. I was nervous, but talked it over with my parents and close friends and agreed to go for it. The manager who would end up training me up alongside her was probably my last remaining familiar face and friend there. The announcement of my promotion to the rest of the team was received with mostly positive responses. Those couple of high school kids I mentioned before were not too thrilled. I was still seen as the new guy, so it seemed like I had just gotten lucky. I wasn't the best at plenty of things, and that didn't sit too well with them. My first priority was to just learn what all my responsibilities were now, compared to what they used to be. Past that, I quickly realized I would need to make more friends. I needed to actually get to know those people and show that I cared about them outside of work if they were ever going to take me seriously, not to mention listen to me when I had things to say. I was 21 years old at the time, and at least half the staff I was to be in charge of was older than me by a minimum of 8 years. Talk about being baptized by fire. Most people were pretty easygoing because I was just honest with them. I told them that I was here to learn, no matter what shirt I was wearing. Team members wear basic polos, and then managers wear button-ups. And no matter what title was by my name tag. The biggest thing, I wasn't afraid to ask for help. I knew the areas that I struggled in, and I went directly to the experts in said areas. That seemed to throw some people off initially and even mounted the distaste for my promotion in others. You can't always make everyone happy, but as long as you are genuinely doing your part to try and be better, that's what counts. I think for about 2 or 3 months of being in management, I'd never had any hiccups or problems. Then again, it's bound to happen at some point. One particular kid in the kitchen area was a lot like I was in the beginning. He was good at his job, never complained, and didn't talk much unless you were one of his few friends. I tried everything I could to get through to him and get him to talk to me outside of work-related stuff. Call of Duty, sports, school, etc. This kid would not budge whatsoever. I felt like it was all but lost cause at this point until it finally happened. I had an unusual amount of people call out for the day, but the last straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was the designated breader for the night. I now had a decision to make. Every other day, the 2 managers on duty would switch who was in charge for the day. And in this particular instance, it was my day to be in charge. So it was up to me to figure out how to handle the situation. I actually came up with a few options, but I finally saw my opening to make it clear that I wasn't just lucky to get promoted. It had to be me who took the spot over at the breading table. I couldn't send anyone else back there, and I couldn't just go back there and move everyone around so I could occupy one of the easier and cleaner jobs. Plain and simple, it was me or nobody. I made my other manager aware of the situation and my decision, and she looked at me like I was crazy. And I told her my reasoning, and she then shrugged her shoulders and told me, "Good point." I took my watch off, set it in the manager's office, and made my way to the kitchen area to don the mandatory kitchen getup. Gloves, hairnet for food safety, and technically the apron was optional, but the breading table was by far the messiest jobs in the entire kitchen, so I grabbed one of those too. Like something I could have predicted in my sleep, the first one to notice and started asking a bunch of questions was that same kid who wouldn't give me the time of day to begin with. I wish I could adequately describe to you the look on his face when I told him to stay where he was and that I was taking care of everything else. Of course, it's one thing to assume responsibility and take over the spot, but if I sucked it up and couldn't keep up with the rest of the kitchen, nothing else would matter anyways. I was determined to make sure I didn't completely embarrass myself and prove everyone's assumptions correct. Without asking, I went over to the sandwich station to see for myself where each supply of chicken was and what needed to be done first. I took my mental notes and went to work. First and foremost, I had to clean out and sift the coater so none of my product came out chunky and gross. To this day, I know I may not be the fastest breader out there, but I sure as heck don't produce poor quality chicken. From there, it was game on. I did my best to keep ahead and not just keep up. After about an hour or so, everyone could see that I didn't just get lucky the first few times I cooked the product, and they started speaking up. The most common response was something along the lines of, "Wow, that food actually looks really good. Maybe you do know what you're doing." I only returned that with a laugh and a thank you just so I didn't get too ahead of myself. The next step would be run breaks throughout the entire dinner time rush. I immediately decided that I would be last. It would be the cherry on top to show the kitchen staff that I wasn't playing. I let the girls go first, one by one, and then the guys. Once I got to the kid who hadn't said much of a word until I started churning out product on time, I told him he was up. He asked why I hadn't gone yet, and I finally let a little bit of good-hearted humor slip out. I told him I didn't want his tummy to start rumbling and for him to get hangry. For a split second, we just looked at each other, and then he busted out laughing. He said, "Man, I ain't 5 years old. Get out of here with that." And laughed, and I laughed and said, "Bro, just hurry up and go eat so I can go after you." As soon as he made his way up front, I thought to myself, finally. I knew I had made some progress, and I made sure to keep the pace while he was gone so he didn't come back to a mess, and I started to think about what I was going to eat. Once he came back and it was my turn, I told him he was taking my spot. He looked at me with a smirk and said, "Okay, kitchen leader, whatever you say, boss," with the emphasis on each of those individual words. I could tell he was still teetering on the edge of whether he thought I was trustworthy or not. I let it roll off my shoulders, and in the same tone of voice he used, I said, "I'm only going to be gone for 30 minutes. You handle that, or do I need to get one of the ladies to do it?" His grin widened even further, and he replied, "Man, go eat already. I'll be fine." Again, progress. I went up front to order my food and talk with the other manager. She laughed at me when she saw me because I was so dirty and covered in chicken coater, but I just rolled my eyes and asked her how things were going up front. She said things were good, and then she leaned in closer and said that the same kid who didn't think I had it in me told her that he was surprised. First, because of how I volunteered myself for the job and not someone else, and secondly, he was surprised at how fast I was going while also making good-looking food. No chunks or burns or anything. I laughed out loud, and I wanted to yell, "I told you so," through the food delivery chutes towards the kitchen, but I refrained. It sure made me feel good, though. I knew I had made the right choice, even if he never said it to my face. The rest of the night went pretty smoothly. I ended up closing up my station about the same time as he did, so we both went around helping everyone else gather trash so we could get out earlier than usual. While gathering trash, we started talking about plans after work and mentioned Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto as games of choice. We started talking about how we played, what game modes, etc., and started cracking jokes back and forth. Once we were finished and I checked everyone else's areas, I told everyone good job and thanks for helping me keep up so the night didn't turn into a complete disaster. Now that we were more comfortable with each other, most of them laughed and said, you did all right. They all high-fived me before we left. After finishing up, I went to sit down in the manager's office where it was quiet so I could finally rest. Although I kept up, my feet and back were hurting big time. Right as I sat down, there was a knock on the door. It was you-know-who, and I nodded for him to come in. He pulled the door closed, and he started out by saying, "Hey, man, I just wanted to personally say good job, like with everything." You stepped up with no hesitation, and then you kept up the whole night. Not many of us thought you had it in you, but especially me, to be honest. I laughed at him, and I told him, I'm well aware, especially that second part. That's exactly why I knew it had to be me, but I also needed you guys to know that I'm not here to always choose the easy route for myself and just leave you guys out to dry. I wouldn't like myself either if I did that. So first and foremost, know that I got your back. Even if it makes me a little uncomfortable, I will do my best to take care of everything. He nodded and replied, "That's dope, man. I really appreciate it." He and I fist bumped, and I gave him my PlayStation gamer tags just in case he wanted to play some Call of Duty later. From that moment forward, there was at least a foundational level of respect amongst all of us. First and most important lesson of being a leader, you are not there to boss everyone around and abuse your power. You are there to serve your employees, your team, etc., and make their lives while they're at work as easy as possible. Although you are granted the power to make the final decision in any instance, you'll never make any solid progress if there's no mutual level of respect between you and your team. You have to build trust by first doing the small stuff. Just like you, the people below you on the totem pole of employment are humans. If you treat them like they're no more than just a body to fill a spot, they'll respond accordingly. As a leader, if you do your part in making sure they have everything they need to succeed, your job becomes to sit back and watch. That way, you can think ahead and keep an eye out for any problems that arise. After a few months of becoming more comfortable in my management role, I started really trying my best to think of even the smallest things I could do for everyone. Oddly enough, saying hi to everyone individually once the shift started had a huge impact. I would greet you with a fist bump, I'd shout your name with a big smile, high five, or any combination of those. And for some of the kitchen people whose first language was Spanish instead of English, I did my best to learn a bit of Spanish so I could show them that I cared about them too. Throughout all of my experience in management, I got the most pushback from my co-managers and upper-level bosses. I can't remember any particular issues I had with any of the employees off the top of my head. Everyone complains, but that's not the same as having actual problems. At the cost of getting myself into trouble, I would do anything I could to make each day easier for all of them. Whether it was breaking some of the less important rules, gas station runs for energy drinks and candy on me, or just automatically taking any blowback for something going wrong, even if I had nothing to do with it. If your people trust you to do your part in taking care of them, They'll do the same for you when the time comes. I've worked for multiple incredibly intelligent businessmen in my life so far, and I can tell you what the biggest difference between all of them: those who truly care about their employees and those who only care about numbers and sales. In the aspect of growth, the easiest way to simplify your business and improve numbers somewhat immediately is to take your emotional attachment completely away. Take it away from the employees and just expect them to do their jobs that they're paid for, which technically isn't going against any sort of rules or anything. You're paying them to work, so both sides are doing what they agreed upon. The older I get, the more I focus on the environment and the overall culture of work. It may not look like it in the beginning, but the companies with a better culture where people feel safe last much longer and deal with a much lower turnover rate than companies who just work their employees into the ground to meet quarterly and yearly numbers. It takes more time and effort to truly invest and value each individual, but it'll come back tenfold. Anyone can be a leader. You don't have to have any sort of title or fancy name tag to be a leader. Just set a good example, be trustworthy and consistent with your words and actions, and truly care about the people around you. The rest will take care of itself. The world needs more good leaders these days, so go be one. Finish up that chapter. Quite a banger. I think that's probably one of the few chapters after reading it through this series of publications, whether it be video or audio file. It's one of the few that I agree with every single word that I said to this day. Like most of these chapters, I could probably reword some stuff, or I could even change thoughts completely. Leadership doesn't change. If you take care of the employees would take care of the business. I live by that, and I would die by that. If you take care of your people, everything else will work itself out. Obviously, outside of work, I want to know how you're doing, how you're, if you have a significant other, how they're doing, how their relationship is, how your family is. If you have school or other problems or whatever, always make sure to ask, because if your life is going terrible outside of work, there's a big chance that your work performance will slowly start to have some sort of direct effect or bleed out. Care about people. It's really hard to do so because we're all imperfect. We're all emotional. We're all creatures of emotion, when it would do us a significant amount better oftentimes to be creatures of logic. It just doesn't work. If you want to be a leader, make sure that you're volunteering to do the hard stuff, and you also care about all the people that work with you and work under you, because that's your only job, is to serve the individuals you work with. So that being said, close this episode up with thanks for listening. Shout out to Lauren for doing all the work. Shout out to Sean for the warehouse and all the equipment. We got one more episode left, and I will see you in the next video. So have a good one.